Yo, going into 2024, I think that the Steam Deck OLED and ROG Ally are going to be two of the most popular choices when it comes to PC gaming handhelds. But for me personally, one does ultimately come out on top. The Ally I'll be talking about today is the most expensive Z1 Extreme model. For a retail price of $699, you're getting a 512GB SSD. This is actually still more expensive than the top of the line Steam Deck, which at $649 is providing a 1TB SSD. Right off the bat, in terms of value, the Steam Deck is the clear winner. The Steam Deck uses the Linux-based SteamOS, which straight out of the box provides a much more user-friendly experience. It was designed much more heavily with touch-based controls in mind. If you want to go into settings and adjust things like your connected Bluetooth devices or view the amount of storage that you have available, it's easy to do so. With the ROG Ally running Windows 11, it is quite honestly a pain in the ass to use. There is the Armory Crate app that serves as sort of a fix, as well as the big picture mode, but it's not quite the same. Windows is a desktop OS by far, and while I understand why ASUS went with it, I just hope that Microsoft creates a proper gaming mode so that with all of these Windows handhelds coming out, the experience can be improved upon. The benefit though is that Windows 11 can play essentially any game that you have from any launcher with ease. You're not going to have to jump through any hoops to get games working properly. For an example, getting Xbox Game Pass to work required you downloading Edge, making that a Steam game, and then adding custom launch options. It's not crazy difficult, but for the Ally, all you have to do is just download the Xbox app. That said, the Steam Deck out of the box is perfect for playing your Steam library backlog, that is, the ones that are properly supported. I was really excited to give the finals a try because I played it on PS5, but I found out that the anti-cheat is not supported on Linux. The same can be said for Modern Warfare 3 and countless others. Of course, on the Ally, this just isn't a problem. If you're looking for a gaming handheld to sort of be your all-in-one gaming PC that you can take on the go and play at home, the Ally makes this a real use case. Now onto the design. Both of these devices are made of plastic, but there's something about the Allies that make it feel far more premium. The white casing as well does make the device look sleek. Despite the Steam Deck's cheaper feeling, I find that the way the handles wrap around your hands make it far more comfortable to hold for prolonged gaming sessions. The Ally is essentially just a slab with barely protruding side handles that, with the macro buttons, make holding onto them far less comfortable. I have slightly larger hands and just find that after an hour or two, it becomes very awkward feeling and harder to stay comfortable with. As I primarily use a handheld when traveling, I wanted to stay as comfortable as possible for as long as possible, and that is one reason that I heavily prefer the deck. That said, even though the weight was reduced to 640 grams, it's still slightly heavier than the 608 gram Ally. This wouldn't be such a huge difference if it weren't for the fact that the Steam Deck is actually a chunky boy. It's wider but also thicker by a noticeable amount, so you will need a little more room in your bag to carry it around. While holding the deck, my thumbs can sit nicely on top of the joysticks. There is something to be said about the placement of them and the buttons though. They are, unlike a traditional controller, shifted up to the top, which makes getting at them less seamless. I don't personally find a problem with this, especially as it makes room for the two trackpads below. I don't get a ton of use out of them in game, but when I ultimately have to use the desktop mode to download certain apps, it makes navigating through the browser and all of Linux so much simpler. This just further makes Windows with touch controls that much more undesirable. Quick side note about these in terms of scrolling. A few of you guys mentioned in my review of the deck that the proper way to do this is actually moving your finger around in a circular motion, not up and down. Now, for joysticks, in my opinion, these Steam Decks are far better than the Allies. They have been slightly improved on the OLED model, so they are a little grippier and supposedly more reliable, but the difference that I notice is my fingers just sit in them much better. The Allies have very little grip and just feel kind of cheap if I'm being honest. This might just be my unit, but they're a lot looser and less consistent feeling in their range of motion. Neither of these though are going to be on the same level as a proper controller. Playing any FPS game feels awkward in comparison. The buttons on each are solid, but I do like how the D-pad presses on the deck a little bit better. I also really like the quick access menu. The way that it ties in with SteamOS just feels fluid, whereas on the Ally it has a more sluggish and less organized feel. Moving on to the displays, which in day-to-day gameplay is where you will see a significant difference between the two. Most notably, the Steam Deck has a 7.4-inch screen that runs at 1280 by 800p, and the ROG Ally has a 7-inch screen running at 1920 by 1080p natively. In addition to a higher resolution, resolution, the Ally's display also has a 120Hz refresh rate. The two are now closer in this regard, as the OLED bumped the DeX up to 90Hz, which I think is perfect for what this device is. There's very few games where you'll be hitting 120, and even in the ones that do, they're likely indies which have less movement that benefits from the smoother gameplay. Though the tangible benefit that does come along with the Ally's display is VRR. This is something that's not found on the deck. Even though I haven't really had any tearing issues, it still would have been nicer in games that are constantly fluctuating from say 30 to 50 FPS, just making that look a little less drastic. I won't lie, going back to a 1080p display after using the deck so much this last month, it really makes me miss that improved clarity. Any few times at night where I may just want to go upstairs and lay down but still game for about an hour, the Ally is really clutch as I'm sacrificing less fidelity. But really, at such a small screen size, I don't think it's worth the performance trade-off. You can run games at 720 on there and they honestly don't look that bad. I've gotten used to 800p and honestly think it looks perfectly fine. Plus, with this OLED display, most of the time I would actually say it makes up for it. The benefits OLED bring are obviously those inky blacks, but also a brighter, more contrasty image with better looking colors. The display went from 400 nits to 600 nits of brightness in SDR and up to 1000 nits in HDR. In the very few games like Cyberpunk that support HDR, I cannot recommend turning it on enough. After going back to the Ally, I just can't help but think its 500 nit display is way too dark. Especially if you're in a darker part of game, it can be a little harder to make out enemies. But what you probably care to know the most is game performance. There's no doubt the ROG Ally is more capable in this regard. The Z1 Extreme processor is a far more powerful chip than the one found in the deck. However, there is one major drawback of this, and that's that the Ally's battery life is far worse. We'll touch on this in just a minute. At maximum, the Steam Deck can operate at 15 watts, whereas the Ally can go into a more powerful, yet battery draining 25 watt turbo mode. It can also go into a 30 watt mode, but this is only when connected to power. From my testing, the turbo mode in 1080p brings a very small performance increase from 15 watts. It's just 5% in Cyberpunk and then 12% in Red Dead. It's a lot more tangible in 720p though. In both games, I was getting around a 30% increase. For pure performance, the Ally at 720 is going to be the best. I tested the deck in its 10 watt and 15 watt modes, and then the Ally across its 3. Something weird is the Ally was running a lot worse in the 10 watt mode than the deck with the exact same settings. I don't know if I did something wrong, and if it's like stupid, just let me know down below. But for now, I will say just use the 15 watt and 25 watt modes. The deck at its native resolution can run AAA games in the 40s with low or medium settings, which I found is more than playable, and at this screen size still looks great. The Ally performs roughly the same at 720p in the 15 watt performance mode, but if you're really taking advantage of its chip, you can get well into the 50s at 720p or sit closer to that 40 FPS mark at 1080p. When it comes to indies, the two are going to be pretty much comparable, and this is where I think the OLED display starts to become the tiebreaker. In a game like Brothers Tale of Two Sons, the game is capped at 60 anyways, and the graphics are so simple that I much prefer how it looks on the OLED display. For that use case that I mentioned of having the Ally being a more dedicated gaming system, it actually works quite well docked up as it's designed to run games at 1080p. Connecting to a 4K display, the resolution scales quite nicely, and while medium settings don't look that good blown up, it's still a playable experience. I would say by far the Ally wins in terms of docking because 720p blown up is going to look awful, and the deck really struggles to push 1080. Now, one thing that I really like about the Steam Deck is you can quickly suspend this system by pressing the power button and then get right back into it when you come back. On the Ally, it makes you resign into Windows and then open the game back up. Now, battery life, depending on your use case, is right up there with or even more important than the OS and performance of each of these. It's no surprise that the ROG Ally is far worse than the decks. In my testing, you're looking at 1 to 2 hours less now that the deck's battery upgraded from 40 watt hours to 50 watt hours. It varies so much game to game, but on average, the deck is getting 2 hours in AAAs and then close to 4 hours depending on how light of an indie. In addition, the Steam Deck's more efficient chip plus the increased memory bandwidth speeds contribute to better battery performance overall from the LCD model. If you're primarily looking at a handheld so that you can game while traveling, in my opinion, the Steam Deck is the clear winner. if I'm going to be on a long flight, I'm willing to deal with less fidelity so that I can play longer. I think a power bank is a good idea to grab for the Ally, and the deck if you want to extend its life further. I bought a nice one from Anchor that on average is giving me around a charge to a charge and a half with both. The last aspect worth touching on is the storage options between the two handhelds. The Steam Deck has both 512GB and 1TB models, whereas the Ally only comes with 512GB regardless of whether you go for the upgraded version. Notably, as I mentioned at the beginning, the most expensive deck is still $50 cheaper while having double the storage of the Z1 Extreme. I do think the difference is now less drastic though, as it's not like with the LCD models where the lowest option is only 64GB. For a lot of people, 512GB will be completely usable, but it's my personal preference that I have 1TB so that I can load up the drive with as many games as possible. What I did was I bought the 512GB model because I didn't want the anti-glare display, and then swapped it with a 1TB drive from Corsair. The process was a little tricky as prying off the plastic was a pain, but once that's done, actually swapping the drive takes less than a minute. The procedure on the Ally, at least from watching a quick video, seems that taking off the back plate is far easier. Now, in addition, both allow you to expand storage using microSD. I haven't done it myself with the reports of the Ally bricking them, but this seems to be less of an issue with the deck. So the Steam Deck OLED and ASUS ROG Ally are two handhelds that are hard to go wrong with. Ultimately, for my use case as a device mainly used when traveling, I much prefer the Steam Deck. For me, it just stays comfortable for longer and helps that the battery is a significant improvement. I'm mostly playing indie story-driven titles when on the go, where the performance improvement of the Ally isn't as big of a deal for me. That said, I would recommend the Ally if what you'll be playing is mainly AAAs, and you're often using this as a main gaming device. What's great to see is that both of these devices, including the Ally, which I was not expecting, are still receiving post-launch updates, which I don't see stopping anytime soon. Let me know what you think down below, and if you want to go deeper with the Steam Deck OLED, go watch my full review next. Take care.